Marshall Tate wiped his hands on the shop rag and checked the time. 4:30 on a Tuesday, and the Chevy's transmission still fought him like a stubborn mule. 17 years running his own shop had taught him patience with broken things. Cars, at least, made sense. You could diagnose the problem, fix what needed fixing, and move on. The phone rang. Tate Auto Repair. Is this Marshall Tate? The voice belonged to a woman, professional and careful. Speaking. This is Dr. Patterson at Mercy General. Your wife Lorna has been in a car accident. She's stable, but you should come immediately. Marshall set down his wrench. The words hit him like cold water, but his mind stayed clear. Always had, even back in Afghanistan when mortars fell close enough to taste the dust they kicked up. How bad? She's unconscious. Head trauma. We're running tests now. I'll be there in 20. He hung up and grabbed his keys. The drive to pick up Nora took 10 minutes. She sat in the school parking lot, backpack at her feet, brown hair catching the afternoon light. 15 years old and already carrying herself like she expected disappointment. Dad, she climbed into the truck. You look weird. Your mom's been in an accident. We're going to the hospital. Nora went still. Marshall had seen that look before when she was 8 and their dog got hit by a car. Fear mixed with something else. Something that made his chest tighten. Is she? Nora started. She's alive. Unconscious, but alive. They drove in silence. Nora stared out the window, hands folded in her lap. Marshall kept his eyes on the road and tried not to think about the insurance papers Lorna had been asking about last week. The ones she claimed were missing. Mercy General smelled like disinfectant and fear. Marshall had been here before, visiting wounded soldiers when he first came home. Different wing, same feeling. Death trying to sneak in through the back door. Doctor Patterson was younger than expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes and steady hands. She led them through white corridors that echoed with every step. Mrs. Tate hit a tree on Highway 63. No other vehicles involved. The impact was significant, but her vitals are stable. They stopped outside room 314. Through the window, Marshall saw Lorna connected to machines that beeped and hummed. Her face was pale, a bandage wrapped around her head. She looked smaller than usual, fragile in a way that surprised him. Can we go in? Nora asked the doctor. Patterson nodded. Keep it brief. She needs rest. Marshall pushed open the door. The machines grew louder. Nora walked to the bed first, her steps careful and quiet. She stood there for a long moment, just watching her mother breathe. Then her hand found Marshall's. Her fingers were cold and shaking. Dad. Her voice was barely a whisper. We have to run. Once Mom wakes up, it'll be too late. Marshall looked down at his daughter. Her eyes were wide and desperate, filled with a fear that had nothing to do with the accident. His stomach dropped like he'd missed a step in the dark. What do you mean? Nora glanced at the door, then back at him. I can't tell you here, but we have to go. Before she wakes up. Marshall studied his daughter's face. Nora had never been dramatic. She didn't cry at movies or make up stories for attention. When she spoke, she meant what she said. Okay, he said quietly. Let's go home. The house felt different when they walked in. Same furniture, same pictures on the walls, but something had shifted. Marshall poured himself coffee while Nora sat at the kitchen table, fidgeting with her phone case. Talk to me, he said. Nora took a deep breath. Remember last week when Mom went to visit Aunt Rachel? Marshall nodded. Lorna had been gone 2 days, claimed her sister needed help with some legal paperwork. She left her tablet. I was doing homework and my laptop died, so I used hers. Nora's words came faster now, like she'd been holding them back for days. I wasn't snooping, Dad. I swear. But a message popped up. What kind of message? From someone named Deacon Rell. Nora pulled out her phone and showed him a screenshot. I took pictures. I thought maybe I was wrong about what I saw. Marshall read the message. His blood went cold. Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Soon this will all be over and we can be together properly. There's more, Nora said quietly. She swiped to the next image. Another message from Deacon, sent 3 days ago. How much is his life insurance again? $500K should be enough to start fresh somewhere new. Marshall set the phone down carefully. His hands wanted to shake, but he forced them still. What else did you find? She was looking up lawyers. Divorce lawyers. Nora's voice cracked. And there was a document. Like a police report, but she hadn't sent it yet. It was saved as a draft. What did it say? That you hit her. That you've been hitting her for months. Tears started down Nora's cheeks. It was scheduled to be filed next week. And Dad, there were notes about taking me away. About how you were dangerous. Marshall stared at his daughter. In Afghanistan, he'd learned to read situations fast. Enemy or friendly. Safe or deadly. This felt like both at once his wife of 17 years planning to destroy him, and his daughter risking everything to warn him. She was going to have you arrested and take me, Nora whispered. That crash wasn't her plan. Marshall pulled his daughter into a hug. She felt small against his chest, like she had when she was little and afraid of storms. Did you tell anyone else about this? No, I was scared. I thought maybe I was wrong, or maybe there was an explanation. She pulled back to look at him. But then she had the accident, and when you said we were going to the hospital, I got this feeling. Like maybe it wasn't an accident. Marshall's mind raced. If Lorna had been planning to file false charges, the accident changed everything. She'd either have to move up her timeline or find another way. Either option was dangerous. Show me everything, he said. Nora led him upstairs to Lorna's home office. The tablet was still there, plugged into the charger. Marshall had never paid much attention to his wife's digital life. She handled the bills, the social media, the online shopping. He fixed cars and trusted her to handle everything else. That trust felt like stupidity now. Nora opened the tablet and navigated to the messages. Marshall read through weeks of conversations between his wife and a man he'd never heard of. The messages started innocent enough comments about work, complaints about the weather. Then they got personal. Then intimate, then calculating that Marshall's been working late a lot. Good cover for us. The insurance policy renews next month. Perfect timing. Nora's at that age where she'll believe whatever I tell her. Kids always side with mom. Marshall read it all twice. His wife had been planning this for months. The accident hadn't been part of her plan, but it wouldn't stop her. If anything, it might speed things up. What are we going to do? Nora asked. Marshall closed the tablet and looked at his daughter. She was scared, but she was also brave. Braver than most adults he'd known. We're going to be smart about this, he said, and we're going to win. Marshall didn't sleep that night. He sat in his workshop behind the house, surrounded by tools and engine parts, and made plans. By morning, he had a list of what needed to happen. First, he called his shop and told his assistant manager to handle things for a few days. Family emergency. Then he drove to Radio Shack and bought surveillance equipment. Missouri was a one-party consent state, which meant he could record conversations in his own home without breaking any laws. The cameras were small, wireless, and motion-activated. He installed one in the living room, hidden behind a picture frame. Another in the kitchen, tucked between the coffee maker and the wall. A third in their bedroom, positioned to catch the bed and Lorna's dresser. The keylogger software was trickier. Marshall wasn't a computer expert, but 17 years of diagnosing electrical problems had taught him patience with complicated systems. He installed the program on Lorna's laptop while she was still in the hospital, then did the same to her phone when it was recovered from the accident scene. Every keystroke, every password, every search and message and deleted file. He'd see it all. Next, he visited Lorna's bank. The teller was young and helpful, probably knew enough to bend rules for a worried husband. I need to check on our joint accounts, Marshall said. My wife was in an accident, and I'm handling the finances while she recovers. The teller pulled up their information. 3 accounts, just like always. Checking, savings, and a money market fund. Is that everything? Marshall asked. Let me double check. The teller typed something else. Actually, there's another account. It's not linked to the others, but it shows the same social security number for your wife. Marshall's pulse quickened. Can you give me details on that one? I'm sorry, but you're not listed as an authorized user on that account. It's individual, not joint. How much is in it? The teller hesitated. I really shouldn't. My wife might die, Marshall said quietly. I'm trying to get our affairs in order. It was a lie, but it worked. The teller glanced around, then leaned forward. $47,000. And there's a wire transfer scheduled for next Friday. Marshall felt his jaw tighten. Next Friday was 2 days after Lorna had planned to file the false police report. The timing wasn't coincidence. How much is the transfer for? All of it. $47,000 to an account in Kansas City. Marshall thanked the teller and left. In the parking lot, he called information and got the number for the Kansas City bank. It took 3 phone calls and 2 supervisors, but eventually he learned the receiving account belonged to someone named Deaconrel.so. Lorna had been moving money, preparing to run. The accident had interrupted her plan, but the wire transfer was still scheduled. Marshall spent the afternoon at the hospital. He sat beside Lorna's bed, holding her hand, playing the worried husband for the nurses and doctors. Inside, he felt like iced out doctor. Patterson stopped by during evening rounds. Any change? Marshall asked. Her brain activity is normal. She should wake up within the next day or 2. The doctor checked Lorna's chart. Has she been under any unusual stress lately? Sometimes trauma can trigger complications we don't see immediately. Marshall almost laughed. If only she knew. Nothing out of the ordinary, he said. That night, he went through Lorna's computer files. The keylogger had captured everything since he'd installed it, including her passwords. He used them to access her email accounts, 3 different addresses he'd never known about. The evidence was overwhelming. Messages with Deacon going back 6 months. Research on Marshall's military benefits. Searches for how to prove domestic abuse and child custody laws, Missouri. But the worst part was a document titled The Plan. Marshall opened it and felt sick. Phase 1. Establish pattern of abuse claims, friends, family, co-workers. Phase 2. Move money to secure accounts. Phase 3. File police report with evidence. Phase 4. Get restraining order and temporary custody. Phase 5. Disappear with Nora while Marshall deals with legal issues. She'd been building a case against him for half a year. Planting seeds with her sister, her friends, even Nora's teachers. Small comments about Marshall's temper, his drinking, his problems adjusting after the war. All lies, but told consistently enough to seem true. The insurance money was just bonus. The real goal was taking Nora and destroying Marshall's life. Marshall printed everything. Every message, every search, every bank record he could find. Then he drove to the 24-hour Kinko's and made copies. Evidence this important deserved backup. The next morning, Marshall visited the impound lot where Lorna's Honda was being held. The car was totaled the front end, wrapped around an oak tree like aluminum foil. It was a miracle she'd survived. The lot attendant was an older man with grease under his fingernails and the look of someone who'd seen too many wrecks. Insurance adjuster already been through it, he said. Ruled a driver error. No mechanical failure. Mind if I take a look? I'm a mechanic. Might spot something the adjuster missed. The man shrugged. Knock yourself out. Just don't take anything. Marshall spent an hour going through the wreckage. The impact had been severe. Lorna must have been going at least 50 when she hit the tree. But something bothered him about the scene. The skid marks started too late, like she'd been distracted right up until the moment of impact. He was checking under the dashboard when his fingers found something that shouldn't have been there. A small rectangular object taped to the underside of the seat. A cell phone. Cheap, disposable, with a cracked screen that still functioned. Marshall powered it on. No lock screen, no security. The recent calls list showed dozens of conversations with one number over the past month. He recognized the number from the bank records. It belonged to Deaconrel. The voicemails were worse than the text messages. Marshall sat in his truck outside the impound lot and listened to his wife plan his destruction in her own voice. The report is ready to file. Just need to stage something that looks convincing. If he resists, I hit record and we make it clean. Nora's the key. Kids always believe Mom, especially when they see her crying. And Deacon's response is encouraging her, making suggestions. Remember, you have to seem scared. Really sell it. Don't worry about the money. Once this is over, we'll be set. Think about our future. No more hiding. No more lies. The final voicemail was from the day of the accident. Lorna, talking fast, sounding nervous. Something's wrong. Nora's been acting strange, asking questions about you. I think she might know something. We need to move faster. Marshall sat in his truck and stared at the phone. So Nora had spooked her mother somehow. Maybe Lorna had realized her tablet had been accessed. Maybe she just sensed something was off. Either way, it explained the accident. Lorna had been distracted, worried, not paying attention to the road. Her own paranoia had saved Marshall from being framed. He pocketed the burner phone and drove home. Nora was in the kitchen doing homework when he walked in. "Find anything?" she asked. Marshall showed her the phone. "Your mom and this deacon guy have been planning this for months. But I think you scared her. Made her rush, make mistakes. What do we do now?" "Now we make sure she can't hurt anyone else." Dr. Patterson called at 7 in the morning. Lorna was awake. Marshall got dressed slowly, methodically. Same way he'd prepared for missions overseas, calm, focused, ready for anything. He kissed Nora goodbye and reminded her to go straight to school. "Don't say anything to anyone about what we found," he said. "Not yet. When will we tell?" "When the time is right." The drive to the hospital gave him time to think. Lorna would be disoriented, probably afraid. She might try to play victim immediately, or she might wait to see how much he knew. Either way, he had to be careful. One wrong word could blow everything. Room 314 looked different in daylight. Bright and clinical, no shadows to hide in. Lorna was sitting up in bed, looking small and fragile. When she saw him, her face brightened with what looked like genuine relief. "Marshall." Her voice was hoarse, weak. "Thank God you're here." He walked to her bedside and took her hand. It felt cold and thin in his. "How are you feeling?" "Confused. The doctor said I was in an accident, but I don't remember anything." She squeezed his fingers. "I'm so sorry. I must have scared you and Nora terribly." Marshall studied her face. If she was lying, she was good at it. The confusion looked real, the fear genuine. But he'd seen her practice expressions in the mirror when she thought no one was watching. "What's the last thing you remember?" he asked. "Tuesday morning. Making coffee. You were in the garage working on Mrs. Peterson's car." Lorna touched the bandage on her head. "Everything after that is blank." Tuesday morning was 3 days before the accident. If she was telling the truth about the memory loss, she wouldn't remember accessing her tablet, or the conversations with Deacon, or the growing paranoia about Nora knowing something, or she could be faking it all. "The important thing is you're okay," Marshall said. "The rest will come back." "Is Nora all right?" "She must be so worried." "She's fine. At school. I'll bring her by this afternoon." They talked for another 20 minutes. Small talk, gentle questions, Marshall playing the worried husband, while Lorna played the confused victim. Neither showing their cards, both gathering information. When he left the hospital, Marshall made 2 phone calls. The first was to his old squad leader, Rudy Brandt. Rudy had stayed in Missouri after the war, worked as a private investigator now. He was reliable, discreet, and had helped Marshall with background checks for potential employees. "I need a favor," Marshall said. "Can't talk about it over the phone." "Coffee in an hour?" "Yeah." The second call was harder. Marshall had never liked lawyers, never trusted them. But he needed help, and he needed it from someone who wouldn't ask too many questions that he found Sandra Kim's name in the yellow pages. Her ad was simple: family law, custody, criminal defense. No fancy words, no promises she couldn't keep. Marshall liked that he called her office and got an appointment for that afternoon. Rudy met him at the diner on Highway 54. Same place they'd eaten breakfast before shipping out to Afghanistan 12 years ago. Rudy looked older now, gray in his beard and lines around his eyes, but his handshake was still firm. "You look like hell," Rudy said. "Feel worse than I look." They sat in a back booth and ordered coffee. Marshall told Rudy everything: the accident, the discovery, the evidence he'd collected. Rudy listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Jesus, Marshall, this is bad. I know. What do you need from me?" "Help documenting everything properly, making sure it holds up in court." Marshall leaned forward. "I'm not losing my daughter to this woman." Rudy nodded. "Send me everything you've got. I'll organize it, get timestamps verified, make sure the chain of evidence is clean. Can you do it quietly? That's what you pay me for." That afternoon, Marshall brought Nora to see her mother. He'd coach her on the way over act normal. Don't mention anything they discovered. Let Lorna make the first moves. Nora was nervous but determined. She hugged her mother and asked the right questions, played the worried daughter perfectly. Marshall watched from the corner, noting every word, every expression. Do you remember anything new? Nora asked. Lorna shook her head. Still blank. It's the strangest thing. Like someone erased part of my life. The doctor said it might come back slowly. Marshall offered. I hope so. I hate feeling like I'm missing something important. Lorna looked between them. You two seem, I don't know, different. More serious than usual. Marshall felt his stomach clench, but Nora handled it perfectly. We were scared, Mom. We thought you might die. Lorna's eyes filled with tears. Real ones, as far as Marshall could tell. I'm so sorry. I'll be more careful driving from now on. They visited for another hour. Lorna asked about work, about school, about normal life. She seemed genuinely interested in getting back to their routine, as if she'd forgotten about Deacon, about the plan, about destroying Marshall's life. Walking to the truck afterward, Nora was quiet. She seemed real, she said finally. Yeah, she did. Do you think the accident really made her forget? Marshall considered it. Head trauma could cause memory loss. It was possible that Lorna had genuinely forgotten the last few months, forgotten Deacon and the plan and everything else. But he couldn't risk betting Nora's safety on it. Even if she forgot, the evidence is still there. The bank accounts, the messages, the false police report. He started the truck. We have to assume she's faking it. That evening, after Nora went to bed, Marshall checked the surveillance feeds from his phone. The cameras had been recording for 2 days, but there wasn't much to see. Empty house, normal routine. The keylogger was more interesting. Someone had accessed Lorna's laptop that afternoon while they were at the hospital. The activity showed login to her email, deletion of several messages, and a quick check of her bank accounts. Marshall saved the log and sent it to Rudy. Either Lorna was accessing her accounts remotely from the hospital, or someone else had her passwords. His phone buzzed with a text message from Lorna's number. Thank you for being so understanding. I love you. Marshall stared at the message. He hadn't given Lorna her phone back yet. It was still in his truck from the accident scene, which meant either she'd gotten a replacement phone from the hospital or someone else was texting him. He called the hospital and asked to speak to Lorna. The night nurse connected him to her room. Hi, honey. Lorna's voice sounded sleepy. Is everything okay? Just want to check on you before bed. Did you get a new phone today? Phone? No, what? Thought you might want to call your sister. Let her know you're okay. That's sweet. I'll ask the nurse about getting a phone tomorrow. Marshall hung up. So Lorna hadn't sent the text, which meant Deacon probably had access to her phone account, could send messages pretending to be her. He screenshotted the message and added it to his growing file of evidence. Sandra Kim's office was in a strip mall between a tax service and a Chinese restaurant. The reception area was clean but minimal: 2 chairs, a coffee table with outdated magazines, and a desk where a young man with tired eyes answered phones. Ms. Kim will see you now, he said after Marshall had waited 10 minutes. Sandra Kim was younger than Marshall had expected, maybe 35, with short black hair and no-nonsense clothes. Her office was small but organized, law books lining the walls and files stacked neatly on her desk. What can I do for you, Mr. Tate? Marshall had prepared for this moment, rehearsed what he would say. But sitting across from the sharp-eyed lawyer, he found himself starting simply. My wife is trying to frame me for domestic abuse. She wants to take my daughter and disappear. Sandra didn't blink. Tell me everything. Marshall spent an hour laying out the evidence. The messages with Deacon, the false police report, the secret bank accounts. Sandra took notes, asked pointed questions, and occasionally nodded in a way that suggested she'd seen this before. How old is your daughter? 15. Old enough for the court to consider her preferences in custody decisions. Sandra set down her pen. This is a complex case, Mr. Tate. Criminal fraud, false reporting, conspiracy. The custody aspect is almost secondary. What does that mean for Nora? If we can prove your wife filed false charges and planned to abduct your daughter, the court will absolutely grant you emergency custody. Sandra leaned back in her chair. But we need to be careful about how we proceed. Your wife hasn't actually filed anything yet. If we move too fast, she might claim we're harassing her while she recovers from a traumatic accident. So what do? We wait for her to make the first move. Document everything she does, every lie she tells, every attempt to manipulate the situation. Sandra opened a new file folder. Meanwhile, I'll prepare paperwork for emergency custody and a restraining order. When she tries to execute her plan, we'll be ready. Marshall left the lawyer's office feeling better than he had in days. For the first time since this started, he had professional help. Someone who understood the legal system and knew how to fight back. That evening, he got home to find Nora doing homework at the kitchen table. How was the lawyer? Good. She thinks we can win this. Marshall sat down across from his daughter. But it might get ugly before it gets better. I can handle ugly. Marshall looked at his 15-year-old daughter and felt a surge of pride. She was tougher than most adults he knew. I know you can. But if things get bad, if your mom tries to turn you against me or make you choose sides, I already chose, Nora said quietly. The day I showed you those messages. Lorna came home on Friday afternoon. Marshall picked her up from the hospital, helped her into the house, settled her on the couch with pillows and blankets. She moved carefully, still tender from the accident, but her color was better. It's good to be home, she said, looking around the living room. Everything looks exactly the same. Did you expect it to change? I don't know what I expected. The past few days feel like a dream. She reached for his hand. Thank you for taking care of everything. I know this hasn't been easy. Marshall squeezed her fingers and felt nothing. No warmth, no connection, no trace of the love he'd felt for this woman just a week ago. It was like holding a stranger's hand. Just rest. Doctor said you need to take it slow for a while. Nora came home from school an hour later. She hugged her mother carefully, asked about her pain levels, offered to make dinner, playing the concerned daughter while Marshall watched for cracks in either performance. The first 3 days were normal. Lorna slept a lot, complained of headaches, asked gentle questions about what she'd missed while unconscious. Marshall went to work each morning and came home to find her reading or watching television, looking like a woman recovering from trauma. But the surveillance cameras caught things the naked eye missed. Lorna searching through Marshall's desk when he was at work, going through his computer files, his paperwork, his personal belongings, looking for something specific. The keylogger showed renewed activity on her laptop. Messages to an account Marshall didn't recognize. Searches for how to recover lost memories and accident-related amnesia symptoms. She was preparing for something. On Monday night, Marshall was watching television when Lorna sat down beside him. She'd been quiet all evening, thoughtful in a way that made his instincts prickle. I've been thinking about the accident, she said, trying to remember what happened. Doctor said not to force it. I know. But I keep feeling like there was something important I was supposed to do. Something urgent. She turned to face him. Has anything seemed different since I've been home? With you, with Nora, with our normal routine? Marshall kept his expression neutral. Different how? I don't know. You both seem careful around me. Like you're afraid I might break. You were in a serious accident. We're worried about you. It feels like more than that. Lorna studied his face. Marshall, are we okay? Before the accident, I mean. Were we having problems? It was the opening she'd been building toward. Marshall could see the calculation behind her concerned expression, the way she was testing his reactions. We're fine, he said. Same as always. Because if there was something wrong, if I did something or said something before the accident, I need to know. I can't fix problems I don't remember. Marshall muted the television and turned to face her fully. What kind of problems are you worried about? I don't know. That's what's so frustrating. Lorna's voice got louder, more agitated. I feel like I'm missing huge pieces of my own life. What if I hurt someone? What if I made terrible decisions, and now I can't even remember them? Lorna, calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. She stood up quickly, swaying slightly from the sudden movement. You don't understand what this is like. I look at you and Nora, and I see these careful, guarded expressions. Like you're both waiting for me to do something terrible. Marshall stood up too, keeping his voice level. You're being paranoid. Am I? Or am I finally seeing clearly for the first time in weeks? Lorna backed toward the kitchen, her movements becoming more erratic. Maybe the accident didn't take my memories. Maybe it gave me perspective. You're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense. You want me confused and scared and dependent on you. Her voice rose to a shout. Well, I'm not going to be your victim anymore, Marshall. I remember enough to know what kind of man you really are. Marshall followed her into the kitchen, aware that she was performing now. Her voice was pitched to carry, her movements calculated to seem threatening while actually being defensive. And somewhere in the kitchen, he was certain a camera was recording everything. What are you talking about? The way you look at me. The way you control everything in this house. The way you make me feel like I'm going crazy. Lorna grabbed a coffee mug from the counter and threw it at the wall. It shattered, sending ceramic pieces across the floor. I won't live like this anymore. Marshall didn't react to the thrown mug. He stayed calm, kept his hands visible, spoke in a quiet voice that the hidden cameras would pick up clearly. Lorna, you're having some kind of episode. Let me call the doctor. Don't you touch that phone. Don't you dare. She backed against the refrigerator, breathing hard. I know what you're trying to do. Making me think I'm sick. Making everyone think I'm unstable. Nobody thinks you're unstable. Liar. She screamed the word, her face flushed and wild. You've been planning this for months. Turning Nora against me, poisoning everyone with your lies. Marshall glanced toward the stairs, hoping Nora was staying in her room like they discussed. This was exactly what Lorna needed. A scene that would look bad for him on camera, especially if edited to remove the beginning and end. I think you should go back to the hospital, he said calmly. So you can have me committed? So you can take everything while I'm locked up? Lorna laughed, but it sounded forced and bitter. I'm not as stupid as you think. She stormed out of the kitchen, her footsteps loud on the stairs. A minute later, her bedroom door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Marshall cleaned up the broken mug and checked the surveillance app on his phone. All 3 cameras had captured the fight from different angles. Lorna's performance was good. She looked genuinely distressed, genuinely afraid. But Marshall had stayed calm throughout, never raised his voice or made any threatening moves that if she tried to use this footage against him, it would actually work in his favor. Upstairs, he could hear Lorna moving around, opening and closing drawers. The keylogger would tell him what she was accessing on her computer, but Marshall already suspected what she was doing, preparing the final phase of her plan. The police came on Wednesday morning. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both young and serious. Marshall was drinking coffee when he saw their car pull into the driveway. Nora, he called upstairs. Come down here. She appeared at the top of the stairs in her school clothes, backpack over her shoulder. When she saw the police through the window, her face went pale. Is this it? She asked. Yeah. Remember what we talked about? The doorbell rang. Marshall opened it with a calm expression, playing the innocent husband who had no idea why police might be visiting. Mr. Marshall Tate. The female officer was mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. That's me. I'm Officer Reeves. This is Officer Patterson. We'd like to ask you some questions about a complaint that's been filed against you. What kind of complaint? Domestic abuse. Your wife alleges that you've been physically and emotionally abusive for several months. Marshall stepped back from the door. Would you like to come in? Actually, we'd prefer if you came with us to the station. For questioning. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but we do need to discuss some serious allegations. Marshall nodded. Let me get my keys. He turned to Nora, who was still standing on the stairs. Call Sandra Kim. Tell her what's happening. We'll also need to speak with your daughter, Officer Reeves said. She's 15. I prefer if her lawyer was present. That's all right. We'll arrange something at the station. The ride to the police station gave Marshall time to think. Lorna had moved faster than expected, probably spooked by their fight on Monday night. But she'd also made a critical mistake. She'd filed the complaint before establishing a pattern of believable evidence at the station. They put him in an interview room and left him alone for 20 minutes. Standard procedure, designed to make suspects nervous and more likely to confess. Marshall had been through worse interrogations in the Army. He sat quietly and waited. Officer Reeves came back with a thick file folder and a tape recorder. Mr. Tate, your wife has provided us with some disturbing allegations. She claims you've been hitting her, threatening her, controlling her movements and finances. Those allegations are false. She has evidence to support her claims. Video footage of you becoming violent and abusive. Marshall leaned back in his chair. I like to see that footage. Officer Reeves opened the folder and pulled out printed screenshots from video. They showed Marshall and Lorna in the kitchen, both looking angry and agitated. In the images, Marshall appeared to be advancing on Lorna while she backed away in fear. This was taken Monday night, Officer Reeves said. Your wife says this is typical of your behavior toward her. That's interesting, Marshall said calmly. Can I see the full video? Excuse me. The screenshots show maybe 5 seconds of a 10-minute conversation. I'd like to see the complete footage. Officer Reeves frowned. Why would that matter? Because the full video shows what really happened. And I can prove it. Marshall pulled out his phone and opened a surveillance app. I have security cameras in my house. Legal in Missouri with one-party consent. They recorded the entire incident. He turned the phone so Officer Reeves could see the screen. The timestamp showed Monday night, 8:47 p.m. The video began with Lorna sitting calmly on the couch, then showed her deliberately starting an argument, throwing a coffee mug, and screaming accusations while Marshall remained calm throughout. Your wife staged that entire scene, Marshall said. She was performing for the camera she planted, trying to create evidence for a false abuse claim. Officer Reeves stared at the phone screen. Are you saying she set this up? I'm saying she's been planning to frame me for months. And I can prove that too. Marshall pulled out the folder Rudy had prepared. Bank records showing Lorna's secret accounts. Printed messages between her and Deacon Rell. The draft police report she'd written before the abuse ever happened. This is the police report your wife filed today, he said, showing Officer Reeves a copy. And this is the same report she wrote 3 weeks ago, before the incident she's reporting ever took place. Officer Reeves compared the documents. The language was identical, down to specific details about injuries that supposedly happened Monday night. She wrote this report before the abuse occurred. Officer Reeves asked. She wrote it as part of a plan to frame me for domestic abuse, take my daughter, and disappear with her boyfriend. Marshall spread out more evidence on the table. The bank records show she's been moving money to secret accounts. The messages show her discussing my life insurance policy with a man named Deacon Rell. And the draft report proves she was planning to file false charges regardless of what actually happened. Officer Reeves studied the evidence for several minutes. Then she left the room and came back with a supervisor, a graying man with the tired look of someone who'd seen every kind of human ugliness. Mr. Tate, these are serious allegations you're making against your wife. They're not allegations. They're facts. Documented, time-stamped, verifiable facts. The supervisor reviewed everything: the surveillance footage, the messages, the bank records, the identical police reports. After 30 minutes, he set the papers down and looked at Marshall. Your wife may have committed several felonies here. Filing a false police report, attempted fraud, conspiracy. What happens now? Now we investigate your wife instead of you. They released Marshall an hour later. Officer Reeves actually apologized, saying they had to follow up on all domestic abuse reports, but that the evidence clearly showed Lorna had been lying. Marshall drove home to find Nora waiting in the kitchen with Sandra Kim. How did it go? Sandra asked. Lorna filed the false report. Police figured out pretty quickly that she was lying. Marshall sat down at the table. What happens to her now? If they can verify all your evidence, she'll be arrested. Filing a false police report is a felony in Missouri. Combined with the fraud and conspiracy charges, she's looking at serious prison time. And Nora, emergency custody hearing tomorrow morning. Given what's happened, the court will almost certainly grant you temporary full custody. Marshall looked at his daughter. She'd been through more in the past week than most kids experienced in years, but she looked strong, determined. Are you okay with all this? He asked her. I'm okay with the truth winning, she said. That evening, Marshall got a call from Officer Reeves. Lorna had been arrested at her sister's house in Kansas City. She'd been trying to withdraw the $47,000 from her secret account when police found her. She was being held without bail. Marshall met with Sandra Kim 3 days after Lorna's arrest. Her office felt different now, more serious, like a place where important decisions were made. Sandra had files spread across her desk and a legal pad covered with notes. The prosecutor's office has filed charges, she said without preamble. Your wife is facing 4 felony counts. She read from the legal documents. Attempted insurance fraud, filing a false police report, child endangerment, and conspiracy to defraud. What does that mean in terms of prison time? Potentially 14 years. More if they can prove she was planning to abduct Nora across state lines. Marshall absorbed this information without emotion. 14 years felt like justice, but it also felt surreal. A week ago, he'd been married to this woman. Now she was facing more than a decade in prison for trying to destroy him. There's more, Sandra continued. The Kansas City police arrested Deacon Rell yesterday on unrelated drug charges. Possession with intent to distribute. He's looking at 5 to 10 years. Will he cooperate? His lawyer already reached out. Deacon wants to make a deal testimony against your wife in exchange for reduced charges on the drug case. Marshall leaned back in his chair. What kind of testimony? Everything. The planning, the money transfers, the fake abuse claims. He apparently kept screenshots of all their conversations, including ones where your wife explicitly discussed framing you and taking Nora. Why would he keep that? Sandra smiled grimly. Insurance. Criminals don't trust each other, Mr. Tate. Deacon was protecting himself in case your wife tried to pin everything on him. It was ironic. Lorna's paranoia and desire for control had led her to choose a partner who was just as calculating and untrustworthy as she was. They betrayed each other before either of them got caught. When's the trial? Probably 6 months. But given the evidence and Deacon's cooperation, I'd be surprised if this goes to trial. Her lawyer will likely push for a plea deal. Marshall stood up and walked to the window. Outside, life was continuing normally. People going to work, kids playing in yards, families having dinner together. None of them knowing how close he'd come to losing everything. What about Nora? Custody hearing is next week. Formality at this point. The court will grant you permanent custody. Your wife will have no visitation rights while the criminal case is pending. And after? If she gets out of prison eventually, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But given what she tried to do to you and Nora. Sandra shook her head. I can't imagine any judge granting her unsupervised access to your daughter. Marshall left the lawyer's office feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Not happy, exactly. There was too much betrayal and anger for happiness. But relieved. The immediate danger was over. Nora was safe. The truth had won. For now, the courtroom was smaller than Marshall had expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, and the kind of institutional furniture that suggested efficiency over comfort. Judge Martinez was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent years dealing with family disputes. Marshall sat at a table with Sandra Kim. Across the aisle, Lorna's public defender sat alone. Lorna was still in jail, denied bail due to flight risk. Your Honor, Sandra began, we're seeking permanent custody of Nora Tate for her father, Marshall Tate. The child's mother has been arrested on multiple felony charges related to attempted fraud and filing false reports. Judge Martinez reviewed the files in front of her. I've read the police reports and the evidence submitted by both parties. This is an unusual case. She looked up at Marshall. Mr. Tate, do you understand that permanent custody means you'll be solely responsible for all decisions regarding your daughter's welfare? Medical, educational, financial. Yes, Your Honor. And Nora, you're 15 years old. Nora stood up. She dressed carefully for court, dark pants, white blouse, hair pulled back neatly. Yes, ma'am. Do you understand what's happening here today? My mom tried to frame my dad for abuse so she could take me away and steal his money. Now she's in jail, and my dad wants to make sure I'm safe. Judge Martinez blinked at the direct answer. And how do you feel about living with your father? I want to stay with him. He's never hurt me or lied to me. Nora's voice was clear and steady. My mom did both. Have you been coached on what to say today? No, ma'am. My dad told me to tell the truth, and that's what I'm doing. Judge Martinez made notes on her legal pad. Then she addressed the public defender. Does your client wish to contest this custody petition? The lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence on all criminal charges. However, given her current incarceration and the pending trial, she's not in a position to provide care for her daughter at this time. So you're not contesting the custody change? Not at this time, no. Judge Martinez nodded. Very well. Given the evidence presented and the current circumstances, I'm granting permanent custody of Nora Tate to her father, Marshall Tate. She looked directly at Marshall. Mr. Tate, this court expects you to act in your daughter's best interests at all times. That includes facilitating appropriate contact with her mother when and if such contact becomes legally permissible. I understand, Your Honor. The court also recommends counseling for Nora to help her process the recent traumatic events. Already arranged, Your Honor. Judge Martinez signed the custody order and handed it to the clerk. This hearing is concluded. Outside the courthouse, Marshall and Nora sat in his truck for a few minutes without speaking. The custody battle was over, but the emotional aftermath was just beginning. How do you feel? Marshall asked. Weird, like something that should have been happy just feels empty. Marshall understood. There was no joy in winning a custody fight against his daughter's mother. No satisfaction in seeing a marriage destroyed by lies and betrayal. Just relief that the immediate danger was over. You did good in there, he said. Speaking up for yourself. I just told the truth. That takes courage when the truth is ugly. Nora was quiet for a moment. Dad, do you think Mom really loved us? Before all this? It was the question Marshall had been dreading. How do you explain to a 15-year-old that her mother had been willing to destroy both their lives for money and a new relationship? I think she loved the idea of us, he said finally. The family we represented, the life we gave her. But when she decided she wanted something different, she was willing to hurt us to get it. That's not love. No, it's not. The trial began on a cold Tuesday in March. Marshall had driven past the courthouse dozens of times over the years, but he'd never been inside until the custody hearing. Now he was spending his mornings watching his wife of 17 years defend herself against charges that could send her to prison for over a decade. The prosecution was thorough and methodical. They presented the evidence piece by piece, the messages with Deacon, the secret bank accounts, the draft police reports, the surveillance footage. Each piece of evidence was another nail in Lorna's coffin. Deacon Rell testified on the second day. He looked smaller in person than Marshall had imagined, with thinning hair and the pale complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors. His testimony was devastating. She contacted me first, he said from the witness stand. Said she was trapped in an abusive marriage and needed help getting out. Did you believe her? The prosecutor asked. At first, but then she started talking about insurance money and taking the kid out of state. It became clear this wasn't about abuse, it was about money. Did Mrs. Tate ever express remorse about lying about her husband? Never. She said he deserved whatever happened to him for being stupid enough to trust her. Marshall watched Lorna's face during Deacon's testimony. She sat between her lawyers, wearing a conservative blue dress and minimal makeup. Her expression never changed, never showed anger or grief or regret. She looked like she was watching someone else's trial. On the third day, the prosecution played the voicemails from the burner phone. The jury heard Lorna's voice discussing how to stage abuse scenes, how to manipulate Nora, how to disappear with the insurance money. If he resists, I hit record, and we make it clean. Her voice echoed through the courtroom. Marshall testified on the fourth day. The prosecutor walked him through the timeline, the accident, the discovery, the investigation. Marshall kept his answers short and factual, letting the evidence speak for itself. Mr. Tate, the prosecutor said, how did you feel when you realized your wife was planning to frame you for abuse? Marshall looked at the jury. 12 ordinary people who would decide Lorna's fate. Betrayed, he said simply, and afraid for my daughter. Lorna's defense was weak. Her lawyers tried to argue that the head injury from the accident had affected her judgment, that she'd been manipulated by Deacon, that she'd never actually intended to follow through with the plan, but the evidence was overwhelming. The messages, the bank records, the timeline, everything pointed to a calculated, months-long conspiracy to destroy Marshall and abduct Nora. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Marshall didn't plan to attend. He'd seen enough of courtrooms and lawyers and legal proceedings. But Sandra Kim convinced him it would be important for Nora to see the process completed. Closure, she called it. Judge Williams was different from the custody judge, older, more formal, with the gravitas of someone who'd spent decades weighing human failures. The courtroom was fuller this time, with reporters and curiosity seekers drawn by the unusual nature of the case. Lorna wore the same blue dress. She looked thinner than she had during the trial and older. Prison was aging her in ways the stress of the conspiracy never had. The prosecutor recommended the maximum sentence, 14 years. This was not a crime of passion or desperation, he said. This was a calculated, deliberate attempt to destroy an innocent man and traumatize a child for financial gain. Lorna's lawyer asked for leniency, citing her clean record and the head trauma from the accident. But it was a weak argument, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Judge Williams read the sentence without emotion. 14 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 7 years. Marshall felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no relief. Just emptiness where 17 years of marriage used to be done. A week later, he got a call from the prison. Lorna wanted to see him. Marshall almost said no. He had no desire to see his ex-wife. No interest in whatever she might want to say. But something made him reconsider, maybe curiosity, maybe the need for real closure. The visitation room at the state prison was exactly what he'd expected. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lights, guards watching from the corners. Lorna was already seated when he arrived, wearing orange scrubs and no makeup. She looked like a stranger. "Thank you for coming," she said when he sat down across from her. Marshall didn't respond. He'd come to listen, not to make conversation. "I wanted to explain." "There's nothing to explain." "Marshall, please. I need you to understand." "I understand perfectly." Marshall's voice was calm and cold. "You buried your soul for money and control. That girl deserves better than a snake in her life." Lorna's composure cracked. "She's my daughter too." "Not anymore. You gave up that right when you decided to use her as a weapon. The accident changed everything." "I was confused, scared." "The accident didn't change anything. You've been planning this for months before you ever hit that tree." Marshall stood up. "You made your choices. Now live with them." He walked toward the door without looking back. "Marshall, wait." He stopped but didn't turn around. Will you tell Nora I love her?" Marshall glanced back at the woman who'd shared his bed for 17 years, who'd given birth to his daughter, who'd tried to destroy them both for 30 pieces of silver. "No," he said. "I won't." 1 year later, Marshall was working late in his shop when Nora brought him dinner. She'd started doing that on nights when he lost track of time, showing up with sandwiches or leftovers from whatever she'd cooked for herself. "Thanks," he said, wiping his hands before taking the plate. "Mrs. Chin's Honda is making that sound again," Nora said, settling into the chair by his workbench. "I'll look at it tomorrow. Probably needs new brake pads." They ate in comfortable silence. The shop felt peaceful at night, with just the two of them and the familiar smell of motor oil and metal. Marshall had always done his best thinking here, surrounded by tools and problems that had logical solutions. "How is therapy today?" he asked. "Good. Dr. Williams thinks I'm making progress." Nora finished her sandwich and crumpled the wrapper. "She wants to know if you'd be willing to do a session together." "What kind of session?" "Just talking. About how we're both doing, how we're handling everything." Nora looked at him carefully. "I told her I'd ask, but that you probably wouldn't want to." Marshall considered it. He'd resisted therapy for himself, preferring to deal with things privately. "But if it would help Nora, set it up," he said. "Really? Really?" Nora smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her in months. "Thanks, Dad." Later that evening, after Nora had gone to bed, Marshall walked through their quiet house. It felt different now. Cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted. He'd thrown away most of Lorna's belongings, repainted the bedroom, rearranged the furniture, making the space there's instead of theirs in his home office. A framed newspaper clipping sat on his desk. Mother sentenced to 14 years in insurance plot involving family. Marshall had kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that people weren't always what they seemed. That trust had to be earned, not given. That protecting the people you loved sometimes meant making hard choices. He turned off the lights and checked the locks. Old habits from a different kind of war. Upstairs, he could hear Nora talking quietly on the phone with one of her friends. Normal teenage conversation about school and boys and weekend plans. The sound of a life returning to normal. Marshall had one. Not with violence or revenge, but with patience and preparation and the simple truth. Lorna was gone, locked away for years to come. Nora was safe, thriving in therapy and school, building the kind of future she deserved. That it wasn't the ending Marshall had expected when he married Lorna 17 years ago. But it was the ending his daughter needed, and that was enough.